session. And I want to start out by saying that my work for the last 4 decades has been about purpose. Purpose in leadership, purpose in life, purpose in healthcare and healing, purpose in work. So I've been writing about it, researching it, coaching, looking at it from a variety of angles, but it's really amped up in the last few years. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that's happened. But going back, I feel like right now I'm in prime time. I'm 72 years old, and people say, well, when are you going to retire? And I said, the answer is probably never, but I'm actually in prime time for what I love to do, for what I believe in, and it's just a number anyway. And so I feel like having built a platform over time, now's the time. I just did a PBS special called The Power of Purpose this last year. And you know, when PBS came to me, I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, in the US and the States. And when PBS Public Broadcasting came to me and said they wanted to do a special, a 1-hour special on the power of purpose, I said, why? And they said, because our viewers are basically in this point in their lives where this has become a movement. It's a movement in healthcare, in healing, and it's also in leadership and a lot of other areas. And so we did that. We shot this PBS special, and it was shown in 375 cities so far. And it's so the game has really changed for me in a lot of ways because of that. But going backwards from today, in 1967, I graduated from counseling psychology graduate school, and I was trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. You'd think you'd figure that out in counseling, but it's always about other people, not so much about you. And so I noticed in the graduate school where I was coming from that there was a notice on the bulletin board that somebody who I just studied for the last several years was doing a 1-week seminar in San Diego. So I went to San Diego for a week, and the man's name was Viktor Frankl. And so I spent 7 straight days with Viktor Frankl. If you don't know his work, Viktor Frankl wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And Man's Search for Meaning, I think, is one of the most important books written. Frankl was in a series of concentration camps. He was in his era. He died about 10 years ago, 11 years ago, but in his 90s, 93. But at the height of his work, he was at one point a protege of Sigmund Freud's, and with Alfred Adler and Carl Jung and others in Europe. He basically was a thought leader. But at the height of his work, training residents in psychiatry and neurology in Vienna, he was taken by the Nazis, and he was in 4 different concentration camps. And he survived, but his family did not. His pregnant wife, Tilly, died. His parents died, his siblings died, and he survived. He was liberated from Auschwitz. He weighed 87 pounds. He went back to Vienna. He healed, and he basically sat down after he healed and wrote Man's Search for Meaning in 9 days. And what he said was basically this, in a nutshell. He said the last of the freedoms is choice. It's to choose what you want your life to be about, regardless of the circumstances. And he said those that tended to do better, no guarantee of survival, but better in the concentration camp were those that had a reason to get up in the morning. And purpose to me is that, as simple as that. It's why do you get up in the morning? what's your reason for getting up in the morning? And without a reason to get up in the morning, we don't do as well, we don't live as long, we don't heal as quickly, we're not as productive, we're not as happy. I've spent a lot of time in neuroscience labs across the country in the last couple of years, really looking at the brain and purpose, the brain and healing, the brain and how things work. And one of the great discoveries that I had was how purpose and the brain are absolutely connected in ways that I never understood before. So in terms of longevity, aging, healing, all of that, we'll talk about it. But it's not just psychological or philosophical or leadership oriented. It also has a lot to do with our brain function, with our body, with other things. The whole notion of purpose. About 5 years ago, the American AARP, it used to be called the American Association of Retired Persons, but even they have dropped the R, the retired part of it. It's now just ARP. And it's the largest trade organization in the world. It has 40 million members, all over the age of 50. And so it's a very large organization. I was hired by the then CEO of ARP to help reimagine aging. And so my co-author and I wrote this book, Life Reimagined. Alan Weber, some of you may know Alan. Alan was the editor of the Harvard Business Review, and he left there and he founded Fast Company magazine, which he ran with Bill Taylor for 12 years and then sold it for the largest price of any business magazine in the history of publishing in the U.S. So we've been friends and colleagues for many years, and we worked together on Life Reimagined. And so as we were looking at phases of life, and particularly the second half of life, we did some language studies. We hired a firm of linguists called Maslansky and Lance to go out and talk to people and ask them, how are they talking about aging these days? And so we interviewed hundreds of people. They interviewed hundreds of people. And they found out this. They found out basically people aren't talking about aging. They're talking about living. The study we did was called The Language of Aging, and we quickly changed it to the language of living, because people were not talking about aging, they were talking about living. And across the world right now, we have a longevity revolution going on. I don't know what it's like where you live, but in the US, 10,000 people a day turn 50. Every day, 10,000 people turn 50, and that's going to end. Same with 65. It's a longevity revolution. People are living on average 3 decades longer. And so we're thinking, well, how do we, what are the new life skills for living a longer life? What are the new life skills for working longer? What are the new life skills for being in a relationship longer? You know, on and on. And so we started to take a look at that, and we found that the language people were using were words like opportunity and possibility. And so this is the old story of life. So this is the old story. And the question is, what is your story? Not what is the story, but what is your story. But the old story, if you look at the vertical axis, that's personal growth or discovery or learning. And down at the bottom is childhood, adolescence, adulthood, retirement, old age. This is a story I grew up with. Grow up, hit a certain point, maybe retire, grow old, decline, die, that sort of thing. Anybody here grow up with that story? And so my dad worked for the same organization for 40 years, retired, and died 24 months later. And I started to look at, way back when, in my own history, I started to do retirement studies on why so many leaders and executives died within a short period after retiring. How many of you know somebody who retired, died within? If you look at the research, I first did it with 3M Company and then IBM and other places, and I looked at it and it was shocking to me, scary to me to see how many people. Well, what was that all about? Why did they decline so quickly after having lived a vital life up to a certain point? So I started to look at that, and I decided that this was not the story. So the new story, same bottom, childhood, adolescence, adulthood, but there's a new life stage here. There's a period here where we've added potentially 30 years or 3 decades to life. And you see the uptick here. Rather than decline, there's a period here of possible reimagining, we call it. And one of the things when we did the language studies in writing this book is we found that people didn't like language like reinvent. People that said, I don't need to reinvent my life, it's not broken. What I need to do is renew it, reimagine it, add to it, let go of certain things. And so that's what that uptake is all about. So Life Reimagined was born, and Work Reimagined, because many people are going to continue to work during this period of time. It may not be full-time work, it may not be paid work, it may be full-time work and paid work, or it could be caretaking work, volunteer work, or anything. So the question is, what is your own story relative to this? So the thing I'm most interested in is that dip in the curve. So there's a whole new, you look at this dip right here. When are the happiest times in life, according to the research? Oftentimes, it's the younger years and it's the older years. It used to be that in the old story of decline, people used to think of going back, being younger, doing all of that. And we find now in the research and in the neuroscience labs that the happiest times of life are earlier and later. But there is this U curve here in the middle. This little curve, it's a period of reimagining. There's a dip in the middle. If you Google U curve happiness, you'll see the research on why this midlife dip happens for so many people. At some time in the middle of our existence, there tends to be a bottoming out or a dip for many people. And without the tools, without the new story, the reimagining, oftentimes people don't know what to do at this point in time, so they keep repeating the past, or they keep doing certain things that don't add to the reimagining of this new curve, this upward curve. So there is the old story, the new story, and then there's, so Life Reimagined now is a life skill. So with Life Reimagined, sometimes we're pushed by pain, sometimes we're pulled by possibility. So sometimes we're pushed into reimagining, sometimes we're pulled by the possibilities. And so what I like to think about it is a life spiral. And the way I see it is that periodically we're on plateaus. We're in periods of our life where things are okay, not perfect, but there's a certain solidness, there's a certain predictability, a certain groundedness to life. It could be that that plateau is boring. For some people, they're at a point where their life is kind of more of the same, and they want to grow, change, etc. And along, usually, whether it's a good period, a positive period, or a negative period, along will come a trigger which knocks us off our plateau. And these are triggering examples of triggering or inflection points in our life. We've all had many of these. These are just a few, but these are periods where we've had to change, where we've been pushed often or pulled to make changes in our lives. So triggers often are wake-up calls or times when we grow. Triggers are a fact of life. They're going to continue to go on, but what happens is there's a period of limbo. There's a period of uncertainty. And these are these periods of limbo. It's actually where we need leadership more than ever, starting with self-leadership, self-guidance. But these periods of limbo are periods where something is ending, something else is beginning, potentially, but we're living in the question. We're living in the what's next question. How do I get through this? And so whether it's self-guidance or guidance in organizations from leadership, we're periodically in periods of limbo where we need to pause, step back, and have practices. We're only as good as our practices. As leaders, as parents, as human beings, the question is, what are your practices? So we say in the book Life Reimagined that it takes, to reimagine, it takes choice, curiosity, and courage. Choice is what Viktor Frankl said, the last of the human freedoms is choice, regardless of your circumstances. It's to choose what you want your life to be about in the next moment, the next day, the next period of time. And I can't think of anything more drastic, and having spent time with Frankl, than a concentration camp. I can't even imagine. But he said those that got up and were able to envision their beloved, or envision their future, or reach out and touch and give somebody else a crust of bread or a kind word or a hug, tended to do much better than those that were self-absorbed. There are 3 myths about purpose. 3 myths, which I want to dispel right at the beginning here. The first myth about purpose and choice is that with purpose you have to have a cause. No, you don't have to have a cause. Purpose is a mindset, like Frankl was saying. It's a mindset that you bring to life on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment basis. It's who you bring to whatever you're doing all the time. Secondly, the second myth of purpose is that it'll be a revelation to you. If you just are old enough or are in the right circumstances or lucky enough, your purpose will be revealed to you. No, purpose is a practice. It's something we do on a day-to-day basis, and out of that practice it continually is revealed to us. Third myth is that purpose is a luxury, that it's only for the rich or the educated or the wealthy or whatever. No, purpose is fundamental. It's fundamental to our lives in so many ways. When I was going into the neuroscience labs, there was a doctor this last year named Majid Fatoui. He's an Iranian doctor, trained at Johns Hopkins. He's now at Georgetown. He's now in Washington, D.C. And he's a neurologist who's done a lot of work on dementia and relative to, and he said this, he said, Richard, imagine a pill that would reduce the effects of Alzheimer's substantially. Imagine a pill, the same pill that would increase your sleep behaviors in a positive direction, that would reduce the possibility of macroscopic stroke by as much as 40%. And he went on, and he was listing all these things. He said, what would you pay for that pill? said, I don't know, a bunch. And he said, well, it's free. It's purpose. What we've done, and he's a student, this Majid Fatui, he's written a book called Boosting the Brain. And he said, what we found when we do autopsies on people who have Alzheimer's, we've done quality of life purpose research with them along the way, we found that two people who have got the same plaques and tangles in their brain when we look at it, one has lived a relatively normal aging life, and the other has had, institutionalized Alzheimer's. The difference has been a sense of purpose. So we're learning a whole lot about this, but what we're learning is it's not a luxury, it's fundamental. It's fundamental to who we are as human beings, and not that. So choice is important as we move forward. The second is curiosity. Curiosity is finding the extraordinary in the ordinary. You're so curious about yourself and so curious about life that you find the extraordinary in the person next to you here, in the ordinary, in the day-to-day. So you're open to learning, you're open to growth, you're open to maturing in that way through curiosity. So part of getting through limbo is choice, part of it's curiosity, and the third part is courage. It's the courage to try new practices, it's the courage to open ourselves up to new learning. So in a nutshell, in the middle, this is you. This is your story, your core, your essence. So everything has essence at the core, and it has form. You have form, you have a title, you live in a body, but at the core, at the heart of things is essence. This is things like we're talking about, like purpose and values and gifts and all the things that are part of this toolkit that are part of your essence. And when the two come together, we have a sense of alignment. We have a sense of integrity, a sense of integration. And I think that's what people are after throughout their lives, is that sense of wholeness. The key is to grow whole, not old. You can't help growing old. You started growing old when you were born. But growing whole is a choice. And along the way, these triggers, oftentimes, the triggers we're talking about, they trigger us to go higher and to go deeper. They trigger us to go higher means to step back and look at the big picture. Deeper means to look at what's core to me now, what's core to the next phase of my life, what is it that I'm going to stand on and stand for. And so the courage of growing whole, being authentic, is what we're really talking about here. And that's the power in purpose.